So today we're going to be speaking about search engine marketing in 2020 and beyond. But first of all, just a bit of an introduction to who I am. So I'm Kier Humpreys, I'm Head of Customer Experience at Sagittarius. I'm responsible for experience and performance marketing, and I love any opportunity to get out my corporate photo that was taken on day one at Sagittarius, and it's so nice to see it beamed across the world this morning. If you detect a hint of sarcasm, that's definitely there. So a quick introduction to Sagittarius. So we have offices across the UK, Europe and Asia. Just going to move something very quickly. And we cover the whole digital space from performance marketing through to enterprise design and builds and everything in between to drive conversion and push businesses forward and enable ongoing digital transformation journey that every sector finds itself on. We are a Google Premier partner, but we're also an agency with a long-standing history of excellence within travel. And ultimately, we help brands create conversations that drive conversions. And we've worked in travel for years, and this is just a snapshot of the brands that we partner with. But enough about Sagittarius for now. Today, we're going to be covering the following. So what we mean by SEM, search now and search in the future, its place in a wider strategy, understanding intent and attribution. So the reason you're here today is to talk about search engine marketing, or at least to hear me talk about search engine marketing and then ask me difficult questions. The first thing to point out is that this is not a top 10 tips to rank #1 on Google webinar. If that's what you're after, I do have one top tip for you, and that would be don't listen to top tips, other than that one, obviously. So SEM, or search engine marketing, historically was the umbrella term for paid and organic search. And more recently, this is now focused in on paid search, with SEO covering organic search. So search marketing has become the umbrella term for SEM and SEO. So SM equals SEM plus SEO. I think it's fair to say that in the industry, perhaps we overcomplicate things, and that's probably quite clear from that naming convention. But it's also quite clear from how people think about search. Today, we're going to consider both organic and paid search at a high level, understand where we are now, what the future holds, and how we should be thinking about this entire area in 2020 and beyond. And whilst, yes, you are all in the travel industry, I'm going to talk about this quite generally with some nods to travel. And I'm doing this because a lot of what you need to know about SEM applies across the board. And to deliver a sound search strategy, we need to take a few steps back and consider just what search actually is. So search is a business, and I like Google. I've used it since it launched in the dark days of search, and it was a revelation. But those days are gone, and search isn't what it used to be, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it's also important to remember that Google exists to make money. At its core, it's a money-making machine, and that income relies on a few things, one of which being its dominance as a platform, which forces advertisers to spend, but the other is on its quality of results. Without that, the volume would eventually fall away. So whilst Google may be vague, bordering on unhelpful in explaining how it uses data in search, it still needs you to deliver quality for it to surface. And when they give even vague advice, it's useful. And we'll circle back to this. Now, our reliance on search, especially in the times we're in now, has never been so great. And as marketers, this can be quite dangerous because we can obsess over the numbers. We can have laser focus on the metrics and be so drawn into it, we don't actually see the whole piece holistically. So as brands and agencies, we're used to tracking rankings and understanding that position 1 is exponentially better than a position 2 ranking on Google. The same on paid. And I've worked with brands in the past who are solely driven by paid clicks, and dropping position to position 3 on a key term really hurt their business badly. But we see it in isolation. And if rankings go down, we worry. We might buy paid slots to fill that gap, and we work and work to fix it. But if they go up, we put it on a nice report somewhere and we celebrate. And that can lead us to bad decisions because we can fixate on the metrics, and it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy that those metrics are all that matters. So click-through rates, impressions, clicks, positions, it's all useful data, but it's often without nuance. And when you then add a layer of return on investment, you can start to view the world in a really linear way where display advertising is useless because it never delivers any revenue, but retargeting is the golden child because its return is great. Every tactic on screen has a use. It has a relevant measurement metric, and it can play a key part in strategic search in 2020 and beyond. So search needs to exist as part of a wider strategy, but also be viewed more holistically than it is in many businesses. And that powers the long game that we should all be playing with search. So Google makes changes constantly, but they have one very clear goal, other than to make money, and that's to deliver the right result at the right time for the right person. And your job is to be that result. To do that, you need to break down silos both internally and with your agency partners. If you have one agency working on SEO and one on paid social, how well are they working together? Equally, if you have internal teams looking at different areas of search, what collaboration exists? And when I say collaboration, I mean outside of meetings where data may be shared on a screen and everybody goes away back to their normal day job. If you've got one machine working in harmony, brilliant, but I'd wager it's not always like that. And the very core of this webinar is about search connecting users to something that meets their needs and wants. Now that involves knowing them, serving them, and rewarding them. And that's where we'll end up today after a brief tour of search in 2020. So what does the current search landscape look like? And I picked this picture because I think it represents what most of us have been doing, including the post-it note, which I have on my wall, even in a less organized way than this chap does. So the game has changed on search. And as we discussed, Google at first existed to make search better. And boy, was it bad. Ask Jeeves was a thing back then, where it told you to type actual questions, but still only search for keywords. And Google then aimed to get people to a search result in lightning fast times, which it did, and get people off of Google onto the right result quickly. It did. It was a sea of blue text on white, almost a Spartan search savior in a sea of dross. But things have changed. So thanks to great research from JumpShot and SparkToro, we've been able to see what search really looks like in the modern era. Google serves 50% of users without them ever leaving Google. Now, think back again to its humble beginnings, and that 50% left Google to go to a site. Now, Google is that site. And I'm aware that I've talked a lot about Google already in a short time. And I like Bing, genuinely. It's often a lot more forward-thinking than Google. But Google is search when we talk about search. Back in 2019, 94% of searches were taking place on Google property, when you include Google Images, YouTube, and Google Maps. And understanding where Google is looking to take search should be key to your ongoing strategies. But a spoiler, it doesn't have to be as complicated as it might seem, or perhaps as the search industry will make you believe. So what this means for brands is that search is changing. We've seen research on mobile, zero-click searches where people don't leave Google are up almost 62% in 2019, with organic click-through rate almost halving in 3 years. Now, paid click-through rate, well, that's increasing because Google exists to make money, remember? The whole landscape of search is constantly changing, but you probably don't notice it day to day, and neither do users. Users don't sit there thinking, oh, well, in the old days, I could just click a nice organic link and Google would just take me off to a site, but now it's giving me the answer right away, which is just not what I asked for. It's just not how people think. They don't see it that way. They evolve with the offering, and that's what we have to do, or you have to pay Google to let them do the thinking for you. But there's no avoiding search. Even with this in mind, you have to have skin in the game. A recent study by the Marketing Meetup showed that 50% of marketers plan to increase investment in SEO in the coming months, and 32% again doing the same on paid search. All of which, though, comes at the cost of traditional spend. So even though there is a monopoly in search, and we all know this, and it's getting harder to be seen, marketers are spending more and more because that is where people are gravitating to. So, the future. Where is Google going? What do we know from what they tell us is coming, and what can we draw from previous changes? So Google is expanding its experience ranking signals. Now these look at things like stability of content, which is being visualized on the right of your screen right now, but they also look at things like load time and interactivity. It's trying to understand what happens to somebody when they actually get to a page. And what Google's trying to do here is they're trying to further analyze the results that they're funneling people towards. Now they say these changes will help sites evolve towards user expectations on mobile and will contribute to business success. But my argument would be here, if you're only considering site usability and experience because of a potential search ranking factor coming in 2021, your users and stakeholders have bigger issues. Now, I'm not going to stay on this one for too long because there's a wealth of information about this upcoming change, but a few key points for you. This isn't going to be happening until 2021. Google has said they will give 6 months notice before it even happens. And Google have also said that a good page experience won't override having great relevant content, unless there's some sort of tie in the ranking algorithm, and then it may be the decider. But put simply, what happens to Google traffic on your site matters, and it will matter more and more as time goes on. What Google's trying to get to is human search. It's much like if somebody stopped you and asked you for directions and you happily tell them to take the next right, only to discover there's a hole in the road that's consuming cars and they're falling into it and people are dying. You would feel and be responsible for their demise because you guided them to that place. And that's the same sort of thing as Google. They want to take you to a good place. They don't want to give you bad results. They want to take you to the right page. This hasn't changed at all. Unless they can answer the question themselves, then they will happily do that. So as we've seen, organic click-through rates are falling away and paid is increasing, especially on mobile. And that's something that needs to frame your results and metrics when you review performance. Historically, ranking position 1 on Google would be a winner and position 3 would be awful. But you can see from the video on the right-hand side that actually position 1 and 3 are much further down the page here than they used to be on a travel search. In the past, first page results will be celebrated. But what does it actually mean now if position 3 is actually halfway down the page and reduced numbers of people are scrolling down that far? So the ranking reports we all look at without any narrative, they don't stand up as well as they used to. And this is where considering visibility over rankings becomes an interesting prospect. So, in the image, which is now an image of a video, the Google hotel listings have visibility, but they wouldn't appear in a ranking report for key terms. Same way you can see fine results on Booking.com or Trivago or TripAdvisor. It's not necessarily something you would pick up from just looking at the traditional position 1, 2, 3 rankings. So do your ranking reports consider the actual results page to show what P3 really means? Do they take into account the visibility you may gain versus the rankings you no longer have? It's a holistic view, understanding that users don't see rankings and positions, they see the results page. And you'd be shocked at how rarely marketers look at the actual Google listing for a term. But current trends will continue. Automation will continue to be Google's preferred way for you to run paid campaigns. New campaign types emerge weekly with app installation volume the latest to get the treatment, to try and drive uptake of your app in the quickest possible time. And there's nothing wrong with automation if you use it properly and if you're happy to cede control away from yourself into the algorithm. And there's a lot that Google can do that human can't. It has access to data points you would never be able to dream of. And it can be a really useful tool, but when everybody automates, there's only one real winner. But Google's going to continue using more and more data. Even in the last few weeks, you've seen Google talking about its plans here and running tests, which always doesn't search. It's really interesting to pick up on these and see what they're doing. So Google's purchase of Fitbit is facing antitrust concerns from the EU, to which they offered not to use Fitbit's data to target ads. So think about that for a second. The entire Fitbit community's health and fitness data available for ad targeting. Now, I don't have a philosophical problem with that, but it tells a story about just how powerful Google's targeting will eventually become. With that much data to play with, knowing your audience is critical. On top of that, they're testing things like site speed, but we know site speed is a thing for Google, but this isn't about actual site speed. This is about perception of users coming back into search and asking them how fast they think the site loaded. This further enhances the data that Google's collecting around load times and bounces, rather than it just being a piece of quant data where we see stats saying that for every second you lose X% of traffic. We can understand, actually, do people even notice if a site loads at 3 seconds or 2 seconds? So Google is really trying to understand its own data and better understand it from users' point of view. So with even more granular data and user perception of experience, the level your site needs to perform at in future Google is very, very high. It will be demanding as your customers are. We're also going to see a move towards the quality and veracity of a result meaning something. Bing openly say they try to evaluate this already, looking at how long someone stays on the page, or if the author or site has a strong reputation, or if the piece has citations. Now, Google's search quality guidelines talk about this at great length, but they say it's not part of their algorithm, but it is the definition of a good site for them. Now, when Google says they don't do something or are vague, it's not necessarily a guaranteed truth. It doesn't need to be. Again, if you're publishing content that needs citations and don't have them, or from an author that doesn't have the relevant knowledge and authority, that's a bigger issue than search. And in a world where travel brands compete with OTAs, reselling their own offering with bigger marketing and design budgets, your opportunity is clear. Delivering authoritative content and an experience that truly delivers for your user base to set yourselves apart. And this is where lines are being blurred. So Sagittarius isn't an SEO agency, and we're not a PPC agency. We're an agency that enables businesses to create experiences that deliver for customers and exceed business requirements. And that's a conscious choice, because a siloed approach to search risks missing the point entirely. So throughout my time in digital, I've been asked variations of these questions, each understandable in its own way, but frustrating as the last, because we've done this to ourselves. We've turned search into a game where we try to reach the next ranking level and smugly report we've got a higher percentage of P1s than last year. We're even asked to increase organic search by X% and judged on that. That happened to me this week, but we're not going to be judged on what that traffic actually does. And it's bigger than that. It's so much bigger than that. Search is bigger than search. Now, we're all familiar with this model, hopefully. It's much used when considering strategies or perhaps on a nice pyramid graphics required in a PowerPoint presentation. But we can repurpose it somewhat to put search sharply into focus. Because you can argue that search is just the middle part here. And if you just focus there, it's like watching Game of Thrones, but only watching series 3 to 5, and then trying to understand what's going on. Although actually, if you finish Game of Thrones, you might think that's not such a bad idea. Everything, and I mean everything, relates back to a person having a need, searching for something to meet that need, and eventually landing on your site to hopefully fulfill that need. Especially in travel, where that inspiration can come from anywhere. And it's being there for that seed of inspiration that can be the difference between a click to an OTA or a direct booking. And during a global pandemic where travel is really getting hit hard and it's not something on everybody's mind, inspirational content for a booking next year is vital. And this isn't about trying to grab a ranking, it's about being the thing that users are searching for in the first place. Google may not be perfect, but that is what it wants to deliver, and for its business model, it needs to deliver. And Google themselves have continued to talk about the messy middle. It can happen long before a person reaches a site. And when Google start giving this advice about ensuring brand presence, so your product or service is strategically front of mind, or employing behavioral science principles to make sure that your consumers find your proposition compelling, or closing the gap between trigger and purchase so that they spend less time with competitors, or building flexible, empowered teams that work cross-functionally and avoid silos. This is where we need to be listening, because avoiding silos is the key here. And it's easier said than done, but if you want to win the internet, that's how you do it. We're even seeing research recently demonstrating the correlation between brand share of market and brand share of search, supporting a long-held view that brand building is as important to search as any work on search itself. Now, I really just think if you can get a chance to think with Google and what they're talking about here, it's really, really important just to understand that when a search provider is telling you how much extra you have to do outside of search, and when so many people have such a narrow focus on search itself, this is really, really vital for where Google is going. So it's the whole journey we need to consider. It's critical now, just as it's always been, to understand why someone is searching, and when they get to your site, to make it easy to do what they want to do and what you want them to do for a business. Search is changing, it's bigger, it's more crowded, and it's a monopoly. And in travel, you're being harder pushed than most, with Google and third parties competing with you. How you convert someone is a whole other webinar, and it's a personal passion of mine and of the agencies, and I'd be happy to discuss it with you offline, as it's a bigger topic. Well, I'm not really sure offline really exists anymore, as in this kind of strange dystopian 2020 we're in, so it may have to be an email, but we'll get there. For now, let's agree it's critical to understand why someone is searching for something, so what the intent is, and then delivering the right experience when they actually interact with the brand. And understanding intent is where we go next. So, back in 2018, I ran a webinar about intent in search, and I captured screenshots from 2017 and 2018. And I've really looked at this in 2020 to give you a visual demonstration of how Google's been evolving and adapting and changed the way that users actually see search. So back in 2017, for a very non-travel related search, cats, there were 880 million results, and the top 3 results is a mix of actual cats and Cats the Musical. In 2017, according to Google, cats only live for 4.5 years in the wild, but the text about cats is actually about domesticated animals. So what Google was serving up in 2017 was okay, but actually it's not really meeting anyone's real intent there, because the information isn't correct and it's trying to be a catch-all for everybody. But you can also see the size of the search. Now, if we jump to June 2018, we've gone from 880 million results to 2.8 billion results. And these are all now about cats, not the musical, other than the top story. So you can see that Google's ranking ability has advanced in just a year. Google's now showing you cat videos from YouTube, again, demonstrating how Google is pushing things down and putting their own properties first. but also understanding that when people search for cats, a lot of the time they want to watch funny cat videos on YouTube. It's a known truth of the internet, but it's something that Google hadn't picked up on in 2017 and now had in 2018. But there is nothing to explain, though, in case you can't see this, how a cat's lifespan tripled in a year, according to Google. Cats the Musical, which was the other thing that was showing up in the broad search, has got a completely different results page. So how people are seeing search just for those two terms, you can see are very different. So we're seeing songs, videos, pages related to the musical. So the intent change is clear, but also how Google is displaying this in just a year's difference is drastic. So Google is constantly evolving based on what it perceives to be the intent behind a query. Now, last week, looking at cats, the organic listings have all but disappeared. You can just see Wikipedia, but everything else has gone down. We've now got YouTube videos at the top, we've then got Google Images, we've then got People Also Ask. And Cats the Musical again sees YouTube being aggressively pushed. Wikipedia is sitting at #1 spot. So a simple search for cats that used to just be nice organic results you could easily rank for, you've now got a much harder task on your hands. And the point I made here earlier about ranking reports and their worth about narrative, where is position 3 on the cats broad search? You can't even see position 2. So I'd rather be position 5 on Cats the Musical than position 2 on Cats broad term at this point. And that's where this level of insight you need to get from your teams or your agencies needs to come in, because just looking at where you rank on Google now doesn't really mean anything, because actually that is very different depending on what the exact search you're looking at actually is. So moving away from cats, I'm sure you'll all be pleased. A search for hotels in Paris 2 years apart again shows the scale of the challenge. So on the right in 2020, you can see that Google has made the ads clearer so that people knew they were ads and didn't confuse them for organic listings. Now, as a very happy coincidence, it also seems to have pushed other results further down and given them far more space for adverts. Again, all about making money. Now, OTAs still dominate the paid positions as you'd expect them to, but Google's own hotels function comes into its own in 2020, sitting just underneath, again, a free link to the top OTAs. So it's almost impossible to compete here. Organic listings up halfway down the page before they even start. It's tough out there, especially in travel, and especially at the moment. So there's only one real way to succeed. That is about reading intent, understanding intent. So for a simple search of best place to travel in Europe, Google gives you huge amounts of data to work with. Firstly, what's ranking now? So we've got 2010 best places, the safest places in Europe in 2020 or 2019. So it's up to date. And also interestingly, as a little aside, the UK government seems to be bidding on Europe as a fairly broad term, which is a very good spend of our money. Now, you don't need a fancy tool to find this. It's all in plain sight, but again, people often don't look. So back to this search, we've got the People Also Ask box, just underneath the images of Europe popular destinations, giving you solid content ideas, but also internal linking suggestions to ensure that content you're creating links through to or answers linked questions. And if you do get someone to your site, then this is where you should be considering, okay, what can we get them to read next? So they're getting a huge amount of topics, and they're ranging off to the different things that Google is telling you is what people are looking for in the first place. And this is a real goldmine. Now, you won't be able to see searches related to at the bottom of the page, so I've pulled them out the side here. There's also surfaced if you go back to the search bar to adjust your query. And Google's already trying to drive this audience to additional content that it believes matches the intent behind the search if what they find here doesn't work, but also what has served others well. So this again is a great way to fill out your content strategy, but also to help you move away from simple keyword research and start thinking about related queries and how you can deliver content for the audience you're trying to capture. And last but not least, auto suggest, another goldmine for you to help you understand the intent behind a search term and the topic, but also how you can go after longer tail searches if the term you're looking to rank for is one that's too competitive for you. And sometimes we look at volume and think that we need to be position 1 on the high volume term. But actually, if you can get 10 people to come to the site on a low volume term, but those 10 people buy something, it's far more valuable. And this is where this real kind of holistic view of search needs to come in. Competing on broad terms, either organically or through paid, is difficult in a crowded sector, and travel is that sector. But as you get onto more long tail searches and more top of funnel searches, you can start to see where you can engage your potential audience and get them onto the site, and then demonstrate to them that you're the brand that can turn their ideas into reality. Search is often talked about, though, as some kind of mystical discipline by people calling themselves ninjas and gurus, but it's still just another channel to reach customers through. And like every channel, driving any tactical implementation backed by a sound strategy, it relies on how well you know your audience and how well you meet their needs. If you know who your users are, what they need, how they might ask for it and phrase it, and what you have to offer that meets that need, then you have the foundations to do very well in search. It's then about serving the right content to the user at the right time, having a level of brand affinity that reduces any objections that they may have to clicking through to your site, and ensuring you understand what Google thinks is the intent behind the search. And then it's on to you to reward them, delivering on the initial promise from search and delivering some form of lifetime value for your business, but also for the user. Now, this isn't about competing on broad terms with Booking.com or Skyscanner. It's about knowing your customers better than anyone else does and ensuring that your content is right in every area. And when they do click, that your site makes consuming that content and then becoming a customer as easy and rewarding as is physically possible. I've purposefully not talked about top tips to rank higher or any short-term tactics here because I truly don't believe that that is where you should be focusing. Know your users, serve them content that meets their needs, and reward them with the experience that they deserve. So one last thing on attribution. We talked about knowing your audience, meeting their needs, and delivering on the intent behind search, and how you can use Google to help you do that in a better way. But as per my earlier slide showing the position of search in the journey, you still need to do something with this traffic. And this brings us into the realms of experience analysis, conversion optimization, and personalization. And again, that's a whole other area. But no matter what you're doing with your traffic once it reaches a site, there's one thing that can trip you up, and it's incorrect attribution. Last click attribution, where all credit is given to the last interaction before a conversion, is the default in Google Analytics. And it's most marketers' default, but it's not always right or overly helpful. So here's an example where the value of direct traffic is being massively overstated, and the value of organic traffic downplayed, some 175% when you look at first interaction attribution. And that's where we're giving credit to the first interaction that somebody had with a brand that Google can track. We as marketers have to give search a chance and truly understand our own landscapes and customer journeys. Now, SEM can deliver amazing results, but it's often a step on the journey to conversion. And that step is often downplayed when it gets to hard figures. But take that step out and those figures can crash. Working with different attribution models, all part of the free Google Analytics, can help you better understand your efforts and deliver an effective narrative to your stakeholders. This, combined with a holistic search reporting, showing what a paid or organic position really looks like and really means, should be at the core of your search efforts. So I'll finish with 3 things to remember. We need to be thinking long-term, not quick wins. Your business needs to delight users and not game the system, and too much of search is focused around how we can quickly game the system and not on long-term growth and long-term strategy. Search is just one piece of the puzzle. You need to be converting searchers, and they're more likely to click through if they know your brand. So there's so much to do before search and after search. And data attribution is key. If you can't make the case for your efforts, I can promise you nobody else will do. So we need to think bigger on search. We need to see it for what it is, an amazingly powerful tool in a brand's arsenal, but one that has a place and a measure and a reliance on a wider marketing mix performing to its best. If you do one thing after this webinar, please go away and think about how your teams or agencies work together, how your reporting is delivered, and the narrative you receive. And if you really are thinking about search the right way, and a shameless plug, if you don't think you are, please talk to Sagittarius. Thank you very much. I believe there will now be questions.
Well, thank you very much for that, Kier. That's great. We'll just send your screen share.
No problem.
It's both on screen. I've done that for you. Now, who'd like to ask the first question? As I mentioned, you could raise your electronic hand from the participants pane, or just type a question into the question and answer panel. I did like at the beginning, Kier, that you said don't take notice of top 10 tips, and then you gave us some very good tips. One of them was have a look at, start typing in a search term and have a look at the related queries that come up. Have you got them covered? And also do something similar with Google's auto-suggest tool. And I suppose you mentioned those things, Kier, and I guess if we do look at that, then we have to think, well, hang on, there's a related query that's I haven't thought about before. Maybe I should build a page on my website to actually respond to that kind of related query. Is that how you'd react to your tip that you said you wouldn't give?
I'll caveat that by saying that there were no numbers on my tips, so I think that gets me out of that hole. Yeah, so basically what you can do with Google is really understand the wider topic, and that is what you need to be focusing on. So it's not necessarily about search terms, but search terms can allow you to see what else people are searching for on a wider topic, and then understand that if somebody gets through to your site, they don't just want to know the answer to one question, they want to know more than that. So you can draw out a real wide quality mix of content on your site and stop people having to go back to Google to find the answer. And that's really what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to use search to get people to your site. Once they get to your site, you have the audience there, and it's up to you to actually deliver what they're looking for. So you need to be using every single tool in your arsenal to understand what that is and stop them going back again. Because the second they go back again, they see your competitors and they can find any of your competitors that they're looking for. So you don't want it to happen. That is exactly what you don't want it to happen in a shop. You want to walk into your retail store, have a question, not find the answer and go somewhere else. And it's the same thing on the site. The site needs to be answering all the questions people have. Google is telling you pretty much all the key questions you need to be answering. And it's really, really quite rare for people to actually look at it because they use tools and tools tell them certain things, but they're not thinking about it perhaps as the user does.
And of course, the longer people are on your website, as you say, the less time they have to spend on competitors' websites. So it's important that they're engaged on your website if they reach it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not, you don't do this to just get a ranking and sit position 1 and then nothing happens. We're doing it to try and win business in some form or other. So if we can get them to go on a site and go through different pages, if you're using things like personalization, you can then start to understand what kind of content they're consuming. And then if they come back again, you can serve that content to them better. So it's in everybody's benefit to get someone onto the site, to get them to stay there, to get them to consume as much content as possible, so you can really start to understand what your users are after. And if they still consume content and don't buy from you, that still tells you something, that actually the thing they want, you don't have. So you can draw huge amounts of all this data. It's just about looking at it holistically and not just thinking about position 1 rankings and, oh, we've got organic traffic up by 15%, because in isolation, it doesn't really mean very much.
Okay, fine. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to ask a question, just type it into the Q&A panel, or just raise your hand. And there's a hand raised now by Richard Harvey. So Richard, I'm going to allow you to talk. So do ask your question, please.
Hi there, thank you. Yeah, it was interesting. You're just talking about scrolling right down to the bottom and seeing the related searches. And you mentioned making a page on your website for that. I just wanted to know, where do you draw the line between updating your parent page with more content, or turning it into a completely new page linked to that one? How do you decide?
So I would say you need to be deciding on how closely related it is. There is research out there that shows that the higher ranking pages on Google have content of about 1,900 words. I think I'm pulling it out of the air now. There's nothing wrong with having long pages. There's nothing wrong with having a lot of content on the page. It's kind of a misconception that people don't like to scroll down a page. They don't mind doing that if the content is actually accurate and it's answering some kind of question and objection. So I think you need to do it on a kind of a case-by-case basis, really. If it's not that related as a topic, then you can have something separate and really focus on it. But if it's part of that topic, there's no reason why you can't have it as kind of a, I don't want to say a mega page, but as a decent page, it really covers the topic so that the users get what they need. And again, that's what it's about. You can think about it from a kind of a Google point of view, but you've got to think as a user, when they get to the site, do they want to be clicking through 15 pages, or would they rather have 1 or 2 that soundly cover the entire topic? So I would say try and make a parent page that is really useful. But if you need to go off and get into more kind of focused conversations, or you're trying to kind of really talk to people in a more focused way about a topic, then by all means link off to it, but keep it within the same kind of navigational area.
Okay, fine. Does that answer your question, Richard?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, that's a pleasure. You'll see here that we have a question on the Q&A panel from Lisa, who asks, is it worth adding the Google Translate button on my site to convert the language for different countries?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So it depends. I mean, we could do some good more detail on that. Let's assume you've got, you are trying to reach into various different areas, and you want to rank in each of those different areas for, let's say you've got a hotel, and you've got hotels in London and in Cairo and wherever. You should really have a version of the site in the local language that can then rank for those people. So having a Google Translate button, if you've got people coming in from all over the world wanting to go to one place, yeah, it can help. But I'd say a sound and long-term strategy would be to have localized versions of the pages in the local language, with also local currencies and perhaps nuances in language, because Google Translate is fine, but if you've ever used it, it's like me translating French for you, and I'm really bad at French. It kind of gives you the technical translation, but it doesn't really show you the kind of nuance of the language. So, I mean, short term, if you've got people coming that don't understand the language, yes, but the long-term strategy should always be to have a specific version of the site, I guess, for the locality you're trying to reach into. That Google will prefer that, and so will users.
And of course, Kier, with Google Translate, it doesn't do anything for search engine ranking or anything like that, because there aren't any pages there. It's just a device for translating on the fly.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, if you're just based in the UK, but you get people coming from different areas and you want a quick way for them to understand, potentially you could add it in, but from a search strategy, it doesn't really add very much.
Okay, fine. You'll see another question in the Q&A panel just come up from Subramanian, if I can say that, sorry. People always say bid for keywords. What does it mean and how is it done? Apart from content on the website, metadata and meta titles, what other options do we have to make the content rich for Google to rank the website better? That's a very wide-ranging question there. I don't know if you can answer that. That sounds like a day's worth of webinar alone.
Right, I'm going to open it so I can read it again. Okay, so people always say bid for keywords. What does it mean? How's it done? So that is what you do in paid search. So you would choose keywords that you want to be ranking for, and then you would be delivering ads based on those keywords, essentially. So that's basically how Google pay-per-click is based, and Bing as well. It's all based around the certain keyword, and there are different ways you can do that. So it could be a specific keyword or perhaps related things to that keyword that Google thinks. So that, again, that's very generalized, I guess. I'll focus probably more on the contents of the website, metadata and meta titles. What other options do you have to make content rich for Google to rank the website better? So metadata and meta titles, yeah, it's useful to have, but Google will often use its own version of the meta description. A lot of times it doesn't actually show what you put in there, or use what it thinks is better. And your options to make content rich for Google to rank the website better, I would say don't think like that. Don't think about how you can make Google rank the website better. Think about how users will better engage with the site. Because in the long term, that's where Google's trying to get to. It's trying to get to a site, or trying to get to ranking sites that actually deliver for users. So if you think about how users like to consume content, it would perhaps have video content, have images, be very clear and concise. Google likes things with lists and bullet points because it can pull those out into position 0 results, which are where it pulls out kind of listings on recipes and those sort of things. You can use schema to explain to Google what the site's about, to try and help it understand. And again, that's another wide-ranging topic, but if you go away and look at schema, that may help you to break up what's on the site, and that's done in the code. So it helps Google to understand what you're trying to get to. But my absolute key piece of advice here would be not to think, how do we get Google to rank this better? It's about how you actually get people to use the page. What do your users actually want? What have people that have bought from you told you they liked about the site? What are other people doing? What are your competitors doing? What's actually happening out there on the search you're looking for? What other kind of content you're up against? If you go through, so look at the top 5 competitors and see what they're offering, and then go back to yours and see what you're offering, and see, are you missing a trick there from a user point of view? But yeah, again, don't try and perhaps game the system. Just really think about from a point of view. Try and make it easy for Google to tell them what it's about. Make sure that if you've got links going off from the page or coming into the page, it's clear from a navigational point of view what the page is about, where it sits. If you're talking about cruises and it's a cruise to a place, make sure it's obvious in the way it's structured for users and for Google how that works. But ultimately, focus on users, not on Google.
Okay, thanks for that, Kier. And of course, that reminds me, one of the first things you mentioned, that when you make a search, Google shows you related queries or auto suggestions. They're not Google's related queries or auto suggestions. That's based on Google's experience of what other people are looking for, presumably. So we do need to take that seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not Google telling you this is the kind of language that people are using. This is Google telling you these are other searches that have happened. And when I showed you that, again, this is all stuff that Google is surfacing for you. It's surfacing for users to help them find the right thing. So if they didn't find the thing that they thought they were looking for, it's trying to get them to stay on Google and find the right thing. The same way I've talked about when people get to your site, you need to make sure they don't go back anywhere else. Google's doing the same thing. It's competing for eyeballs. It wants you to stay on Google and then go to a result from Google so that people realize how good Google is. And then people think, oh, I need people to come to my site. I'll pay Google for advertising. So it's all kind of a cyclical thing. But yeah, it's all information about what people really want to find out. And if you're not looking at that, you are really missing a trick.
Fine, thank you. Another question in the Q&A panel, you'll see there. A Google algorithm change resulted in a significant drop in rankings for a business critical keyword where we previously held a position 1 ranking. We've analyzed competitor content based on the updated SERP, but we're struggling to find a clear reason and solution. What would you suggest in this instance? And can you just remind people, Kier, what SERP stands for?
So it's a results page basically you get to. So it's when you search for a query, it's the search engine results page. So it's what you actually get up when you've actually typed in whatever you type in. So
right, so
it's what Google's returning.
It's Google's results page after you've typed a query.
Yeah, it's just another example of the industry trying to overcomplicate things by creating words when they don't need to. Right, what would I suggest in this instance? Blimey. Could be a lot of different things. My first suggestion would be to just drop me an email and we can talk about it and see if we can help you out there. It could be that the reason you were number 1 before was because you had links going in there that have been disavowed potentially. It could be that actually the other content is better in Google's mind. It could be a glitch. There was a glitch yesterday, actually, or 2 days ago now, where the Google index completely fell over and was ranking very crazy things, and they admitted it was a mistake. So it could be it's just something that's happened from Google. But honestly, without looking at it, we can give you the honest answer. But there'll definitely be a reason for it. What I'd say is don't panic. And as we kind of mentioned earlier on, we panic when the rankings go down and we try to think, okay, how can we fix this? But if they go up, we don't worry about so much. So I think I'd look at what's been happening, look at how you got to position 1 in the first place, look if there's been any kind of black hat tactics undertaken in the past. Not necessarily saying there has been, but there may have been, and that may have caught up. But it could just be something that the next time round you'll jump back up again. But without more detail, can't necessarily tell you, but I'm happy for you to drop me an email. I can't believe I've got my email on the screen anymore. I need an anonymous attendee, so I can't tell you it. But yeah, if you want to drop me an email, I'm more than happy to kind of look into it for you and have a chat with you and see if we can help you out.
Again, 2 things you mentioned there, and mentioned in the question here. First of all, the question said a Google algorithm change resulted in something. Are you, as an agency, aware or informed about what changes are made when Google change their algorithm, or do you have to reverse engineer it?
Yeah, no, the Google don't tell anybody what changes they make. They sometimes will say that they release lots of different algorithm changes, and they'll say sometimes we try to improve search. Basically, they'll be very vague about it. And no is the short answer to that. They don't tell us. This is why you have an industry around SEO that if Google says one, if Google tells you one thing, then people argue about it for months afterwards. So even if they don't tell you, people argue about it. So they're onto a lost cause there, really. Their argument would be they're always trying to improve the ranking so that people are seeing the right results.
Right, and of course you mentioned something else, Kier, just straight off the top of your head, which people may not understand and might well be affected by algorithm changes. You mentioned black hat tactics.
Yeah. So where I mentioned about trying to game the system, that there's essentially in search, you have, which is obviously a search is quite a nerdy place, you have a white hat and black hat. So it's kind of like traditional, I'm not even sure that traditionally you can say this stuff anymore now, but that's in the terminology. It's kind of white hat is everything above board, really, I suppose. Black hat would be trying to game Google. So in the past, it would have been stuffing keywords into the code to try and get away with things. It could be buying links. I had someone send me an email this week about click-through rate manipulation, which is where you can kind of basically buy in a lot of different people to go on mobiles, a whole network of mobiles, and actually click through on your link rather than somebody else's, so Google thinks that people are more interested in yours than theirs. All this stuff is going on. It may work briefly, it won't work forever, it's not worth getting anywhere near, but there may have been some of that stuff happened in the past for some brands they don't even know about. If you hire an agency, you don't always know what they're doing, they're trying to get results, and if you focus purely on, I want to be position 1, then some agencies will take that literally and do anything they can to get you there as a short-term tactic, but long-term it will come back and bite you.
Okay, fine. Our next question in our Q&A panel is, how important are backlinks to a website? Do they still matter? And perhaps you can tell us what a backlink is as well here.
So a backlink is where another site links into your site, essentially. So Google views these as a way of, Google potentially uses these as a way of understanding how authoritative a site is. So if the BBC site links to you, or if a site that's just started up yesterday links to you, then Google will potentially view the BBC linking to you as a signal that your site is worth looking at. Now, there is a lot of arguments about this, about how important they are. Google say one thing about it, they'd say it's not the be all and end all, and actually you shouldn't be focusing on chasing links. Do they matter? Yes, they do. To what extent? I honestly can't tell you. I think you've got to think of it again from a user point of view. So if a user sees you mentioned on the BBC or on Mashable, on TechCrunch or anything like that, or any travel sites, and they come to you, it does in their minds display a level of authority that you're going there from that site. Is it the be all and end all for rankings? Not necessarily. It can help if you have backlinks coming in. But again, my focus would be on delivering the right content. And that's where you've got to start. You've got to have content that's important to your user base. And then you can start thinking, okay, actually, we need to get more users in. So where can we reach our users in a different way? And then you can say to people, you can try and syndicate your content out there so that people see your content on something like BuzzFeed potentially. And then that link back in can draw users in and show Google that you're producing good quality content. But it all starts with good quality content. And if you're trying to get backlinks about that, you will suffer. But again, don't think of it as a way to improve rankings. Think of it as a way to get more people to see your brand, to develop some sort of brand affinity. And the benefits to search should be a secondary focus on that.
Okay, I do know maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, here people were quite obsessed with backlinks. There was a whole industry out there creating lots of backlinks for you. We've moved on by sounds of it.
Yeah, I think, if you can get backlinks because your content's good enough and you've got good relationships, then great, do it. But I don't think going out there and buying guest posts on blogs for links is a sensible use of your time or money, really. I just think you could be focusing in better places to make sure your content's brilliant and you understand what your users are doing when they get to the site, rather than trying to get a few more spurious people to the site because you've got some backlinks. That would be my view.
Okay, fine. And Lisa, there's a note in the Q&A from Andreas, who's a native German, saying that if you want to confuse and amuse your foreign language visitors, Google Translate does this very well. It's good for the odd word, but not good for whole pages. So I think the answer is, if you think you have a proportion of customers or potential website visitors who are from a different country to yours, it might be worth doing what Kier suggested and actually developing pages for them in their language.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think of it from your own point of view. If you want to go on holiday somewhere and you go to a site and it's got Google Translate on it, just as a user point of view, it doesn't really work amazingly well. But from a search point of view, it does nothing for you. So again, think of it from a user point of view first of all, but definitely from a search point of view, if you're trying to reach out into different locations, you need to be thinking about as locations as specific areas.
Okay, fine. Anyone got another question? If not, I'd love to ask you something, Kier, while people are thinking and maybe typing. I was amazed when you mentioned that 50% of people going to Google don't leave Google. And I suddenly thought of my own experience, particularly on mobile nowadays. If I'm looking at something on Google, Google gives me the answer nowadays. I don't actually have to go anywhere. The answer's within Google. I don't have to go to a website to find out. And that got me thinking, I just wonder if I can hear your thoughts on whether you think that actually Google and search is becoming less effective relative to actually putting some of your online budget into social media, and actually maybe social media is the place to be. And you strengthen that by actually mentioning at the end of your presentation that people are more likely to click on your link if they know your brand. So is maybe social media becoming where it's at, or more important in your mix?
I wouldn't say it's more important. I wouldn't say it's where it's at. I would say that you need to be doing all of this stuff, because as when I talk about brand affinity, people need to understand who you are, what you offer, and it really helps if they know you before they get to search, because then they are more likely to click. And I think that's just human nature, but it's also kind of been proven. Google giving answers to questions, yeah, and there's stories behind these stats. There's the stat about whatever the percentage is, 50% of searches being voice only by 2020, and it keeps moving backwards to 2021 and 2022. But the nuance that doesn't tell you is that a lot of these searches are people in cars asking, how do I get to this place? Or they're asking, what's the weather going to be like? Or they're asking, for like in my example, I have to ask for my 2-year-old to tell me what noise an elephant makes. And I do that about 1,000 times a day because he likes it, but that's not really a search that you're trying to compete for. So again, this is where I kind of talked about ranking reports having to have narrative around them. Some of these stats need that as well. And there's not necessarily an issue with Google answering questions, because it probably isn't questions that you were trying to answer anyway. What I'd say is that it's not about putting money into search, it's about putting money into your entire marketing mix, and understanding that search is there and needs to move people onto your site. And then you can use it again to retarget to people when they've been to your site. But actually, does social media replace that? No, but it complements it, definitely. And if people see you on social media, first of all, then go search for you, great. You probably won't be able to attribute that though, because they may type in a brand search and you won't necessarily know where it's come from. But without that branded work, you don't get that direct search in the first place. So you enter yourself into the mix of people just searching for hotels in Paris versus your hotel name. So it's just like marketing has always been, just like the Mad Men days of advertising. It's all about getting your name out there and getting people to understand what you can offer, and then they would find you in some way. Back then it wasn't search, now it is search. So it still has to be done. It's very important.
Good. I watched all the seasons of Mad Men. I did enjoy that. And the one phrase that they didn't mention, which you've mentioned today, perhaps you can just explain it for us, Kier, is retargeting.
Yeah, so imagine if, you've probably all seen this many times, it's if you go to a site that then those people can then be entered into a bucket on Google or Bing, and you can then serve ads directly to them. You can change the way you advertise to them because you know they've been there before. So it just becomes a more targeted way of advertising to people, because you know they've got some affinity and they've already seen certain content on the site. So if you know they've got through to a product page and they've read about the product, and you can talk to them in a different way to just Joe Blogs who hasn't been to the site before. So it just means that you're trying to pull people back into a site rather than prospecting. You're trying to convert that person that's already been there. So it's cost effective and it does have return on investment, but again, you have to have someone to get there in the first place. And on my little arrow of the linear view of marketing, it's often viewed as being great return on investment, which it is. But if you don't do the bits before it, then it has no value.
Okay, fine. And of course, then retargeting relies on these little text files, cookies, being dropped onto your mobile or your tablet or your computer, so that Google and other websites can see where you've been and track you.
Yeah, and cookies is a whole nother debate, and that's going in a very strange place before 2022 when Chrome stopped using third-party cookies, which is, yeah, there's no point getting into that here now, but what I'd say is when you're on Google Properties, that won't change. So Google will still be doing that. If you're searching on Google and you've been to a site, you're still going to be using Google's ecosystem and you'll still be advertised to. Google will not be being killed by any cookie changes. They're far too big and far too influential for that to happen.
Okay. Kier, many thanks. You clearly know your subject. I'm going to hand back to Tim now to say thank you to you. Thank you to everyone joining us. And Tim, over to you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Paul. I think you've got frozen there, I'm not sure. But anyway, I hope everyone can hear me. I'd like to thank Kier greatly for, I thought, a very interesting presentation. It's the first time actually that we've asked one company on behalf of TTI to do the whole event, and I think he did it admirably. Probably the competition is how many times did he mention Google in the presentation. I would guess 50, but it could have been more, and it just shows the power. Once you have a name, you don't have to market yourselves when other people can do it, because they're a key part of the search optimization and the whole business. But one thing that Kier did really, I think, stamp home to me is that they're very good at translating and putting into business terms what Google are saying and thinking. So if anyone's unclear, Sagittarius is clearly a very on the ball, up-to-date marketing organization which can make that translation into business sense. And I think that's what you achieved today, Kier, so thanks very much. And I think we'll probably try with another company as well. And this may be a trend of, rather than hearing 5 or 6 different companies make a presentation, if we're doing it online, we'll maybe just do the one again. But overall, fantastic. Thanks very much. Thanks to the audience for giving us your time. We had a good audience this morning. On behalf of TTI, please come and join us if you're not a member. Janet Butler, our head of membership, will be contacting you, I'm sure. So I'll hand back now to Paul to finish up, and thank you once again, and thanks Kier once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, and thank you everybody for joining us. I'll end the webinar, and I hope you enjoyed it, and take care everybody. Bye.